That's Rock Hill. 40, or make that 49 in the Queen City. Boomer Von Cannon, WBT.
Hot.
It's 5:05 and welcome in to a Friday edition of the Carolina Journal News Hour on News Talk 1110 and 99.3 WBT. I'm Nick Craig. Good Friday morning to you. Yesterday, Governor Roy Cooper signed a bill, the Disaster Recovery Act of 2024. For those keeping track at home, that's House Bill 149 into law. The state legislature unanimously passed this bill on Wednesday, allocating $273 million from the Savings Reserve for disaster relief efforts in response to Hurricane Helene. Cooper said of signing this bill into a law, which allocates that money, quote, "This storm caused catastrophic damage, but also showed the resiliency of North Carolina's people and communities. We must continue the bipartisan work to help them build back stronger." The General Assembly, as part of their adjournment resolution on Wednesday, also indicated that they could be coming back and likely will be in about 2 weeks, where they will might have to deal with some additional funding as the needs out of Western North Carolina remain out there. We'll continue to track that over at carolinajournal.com. The Republican nominee for North Carolina's Attorney General race is suing the campaign of his Democrat opponent, alleging defamation based on a campaign push poll and a partisan media article that the lawsuit says was based on opposition research. Congressman and Republican Dan Bishop and Democrat Jeff Jackson are both lawyers and current members of the House of Representatives. They are running to replace Democrat Josh Stein as North Carolina's Attorney General coming up this election season. Bishop and his campaign filed the lawsuit this month in Union County, citing defamation of his legal career. The lawsuit names Jackson's campaign, the North Carolina Democrat Party, the DAGA, and the North Carolina People's Law Project. The firm in question, Dynata, D-Y-N-A-T-A, and 10 unnamed North Carolina citizens are also alleged in the suit. The lawsuit alleges that the marketing research firm conducted a political survey in late July of this year. As part of the survey, the questionnaire asked, and I quote, "Would you be more or less likely to vote for Dan Bishop for Attorney General if you knew that as a lawyer he represented people who stole money from the elderly?" End quote. That was the question asked during the survey. In the lawsuit, Bishop says that he has never represented people who stole money from the elderly, and in a statement yesterday, the Bishop campaign said it filed the lawsuit to, quote, "protect Congressman Bishop's professional reputation against false and defamatory accusations that the Jackson campaign or its allies were prepared to launch." The campaign pointed out that the lawsuit does not target Jackson personally, just his campaign. This is not the first time that we have seen legal battles and lawsuits fly over political ads and political questions and newspapers, mailers, television advertisements. It is something that has become more prominent in recent years here in North Carolina. We will track this lawsuit and let you know what happens with that on our website, carolinajournal.com. It's now 5:08 on the Carolina Journal News Hour. Recovery efforts continue in Western North Carolina after the devastation left from Hurricane Helene. Donna King from the Carolina Journal was actually embedded with the North Carolina National Guard yesterday. She joins us this morning on the Carolina Journal News Hour. Donna, good morning to you. What were you doing earlier this week, and what are the details this morning?
Good morning. I mean, what an experience this was. We had a chance, Carolina Journal, we had a chance to embed with the U.S. Army National Guard based in Salisbury, North Carolina. This is just a tremendous team of professionals, and we got a chance to just watch what they do firsthand. We met in Salisbury. We got to ride in Chinook helicopters, or one of three, delivering generators that were provided by Samaritan's Purse, the National Guard dropping them off in Yancey County to families that really have been pulling it together, being supported by their churches, by their local community, This is just an amazing group of people all around, and I got a real chance to, despite the terrible circumstances, to see some real strength of spirit in those who were serving and those who were impacted by Hurricane Helene.
You talk about Yancey County. It's a relatively small county, but as of this morning, almost a third of the customers, power electric customers in that county, are still without lights. And I guess, Donna, I'll ask you, we've heard these reports from Duke Energy and other folks that the entire electrical grid is gone in some of those areas. What did you see on the ground there in Yancey?
Yeah, absolutely. These folks confirmed it. They're telling them there that it's going to be 8 to 10 months before they have power. And that is why these generators were so critical. One woman that we met with said that her mother was down to about 35 minutes on oxygen when the Chinooks landed in their yard and delivered these generators. So this truly is a life and death situation, even today, 2 weeks later.
Donna King from the Carolina Journal joins us on the News Hour this morning. So talk about some of the firsthand accounts. You just mentioned that one woman that you spoke to. Just talk about the firsthand accounts. I mean, we've all seen the videos and pictures on the news, but from everybody I've heard that's been out there, Donna, they say you truly don't understand it until you've seen it firsthand.
That's exactly right. Everybody that we talked to was just so grateful that their family members were still with them, and many of them just didn't know what was going to happen and whether their family had survived it until several days later, and that is just unfathomable to me. There was a lot of tears when you ask people to recount their stories. They think they're ready to do it, and in many cases they're not, and that was part of the tough thing about it. These were multiple families living in this very small community in Yancey County. But if you look just over the ridge line behind them, that entire neighborhood, all of their neighbors just gone, just washed out. They were isolated. They were locked off from other towns. The roads washed away in both directions. One of the gentlemen that I spoke to said his grandfather had cut a wagon trail decades ago, 60 years ago, and after Helene came through, that wagon trail was the only thing left. And it was the only way that they, as a community, were able to get word out that they were okay, that they had survived, and that they just needed some medical supplies, they needed some water, they needed, generators, that kind of thing. Now, this group was on what they call gravity water. They got water from a spring, so they were in a safe spot in terms of water, but power is a real issue. They may not have it for another year. So talking to those folks, one of them is a teacher. She said, we're really going to be looking at kids who are out of school for some time again now after COVID. So they were really coming together, but the churches in this community, in this part of Western North Carolina, the churches have really become the hub for getting aid, getting communication, getting messages out. Communication, especially in those first days after the storm, that was what has been the biggest thing that everybody talked about. They said one person in their area had a Starlink, and that was the only way they were able to get word out that they were still there and that they were alive.
I want to ask you about the communication. You were there on the ground yesterday. Presumably you had your cell phone with you. Has cell service started to be restored in some of those areas? Are those folks now at least able to get on their phones and kind of keep up to date with the latest news is?
Not really. I think what we're really seeing is communities have Starlink, and they're sharing the passwords and getting everybody up and running that way. But other than that, we're really not seeing a lot. I didn't have access to a cell phone when I was out there. And it's very difficult. And one of the other things that was so impressive was how these National Guard Chinook pilots could navigate these mountainous areas and very small landing zones. We landed a Chinook helicopter in someone's front yard. I mean, that seems hard to picture, these very small communities. But these service members are combat trained to fly in the mountains of Afghanistan in most cases. So the Blue Ridge Mountains are lower. It has trained them well, but you really saw how that training and how those resources come together and work so closely with charities and other groups like Samaritan's Purse.
We'll continue the conversation with Donna King coming up after this. You're listening to the Carolina Journal News Hour. 514 News Talk 1110 99.3 WBT. Time for a look at traffic with Boomer Von Cannon.
Hey, thank you, Nick.
1110 and 99.3.
WBT.
It's 5:20. Welcome back to the Carolina Journal News Hour. News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT. Also streaming live on our YouTube channel this morning, where you can catch some B-roll of Donna King's visit to portions of western North Carolina yesterday. We'll continue the conversation with her coming up here in just a few minutes. We talked a little bit about power outages, and while those numbers have drastically improved, some customers still without power. 47,000 individuals in North Carolina without power this morning. Many of those individuals in very remote areas. They have been told that power will be out for some of them for upwards of 8 months. Yeah, try and imagine that. We'll continue to track that here on the Carolina Journal News Hour. Well, yesterday, J.D. Vance, the vice presidential candidate following Donald Trump, was in Greensboro at the Curry Convention Center hosting a town hall that was moderated by Danica Patrick, the former professional race car driver. Vance was asked a question from the crowd about the response to Hurricane Helene. Well, this is what he had to say.
You have the hurricane. Western North Carolina is underwater. What should have happened is that the president and the vice president should have sent the 82nd Airborne to Western North Carolina that day, and it should have happened right away. And instead, of course, we had a president at the beach and a vice president at a fundraiser in San Francisco. What you need in times like this is you just need leadership.
Just need leadership. That's J.D. Vance at the Curry Convention Center yesterday, Election Day, just 24 days away. Coming up very quickly. Early voting starts next Thursday here across North Carolina. Governor Roy Cooper signed the Disaster Recovery Act of 2024 into law yesterday. This is after the state legislature unanimously passed that in the middle part of the week. The bill allocates $273 million from savings reserves for disaster relief efforts in response to Hurricane Helene. Of that $273 million, $16 million has been allocated to the Department of Public Instruction. Governor Roy Cooper said in signing that bill, this storm caused catastrophic damage, but showed the resiliency of North Carolina's people and communities. We must continue the bipartisan work to help them build back stronger. There is a nationwide shortage of IV fluids and dialysis products, and that has intensified following damage to the Baxter International North Cove manufacturing facility in Marion, North Carolina. And that's also due to Hurricane Helene. The facility, which produces nearly 60% of the U.S. supply of IV solutions, was forced to close after heavy rains caused a levee breach, flooding the site and damaging access bridges. The American Hospital Association has urged the Department of Health and Human Services to declare a public health emergency and for the FDA to expedite solutions. Teresa Opeka from the Carolina Journal will join us with details coming up in just a few minutes. 5:23 on the Carolina Journal News Hour. Continuing our conversation this morning on the Carolina Journal News Hour, Donna King embedded with the North Carolina National Guard yesterday, providing relief to those in western North Carolina. Donna, you talked about your experience over in Yancey County. Are these areas still completely isolated from the rest of the state, or do they have ways to get supplies up there without flying everything in via helicopter?
Sure. I mean, they are relying heavily on air support, particularly from the National Guard. They're bringing in, they brought in fuel, they brought in generators, and that's the other thing. You know, we've heard stories about people donating electric chainsaws. Well, that is not helpful unless you have generators and fuel. And that's what we're finding is that those things that are helping them make use of what they are having donated is really being provided in mass by groups like the National Guard flying them in, because you have to have that heavy air support. It's not going to be done by, here and there small. But for those who are getting supplies, they are getting them in most cases. Churches are providing the location hub for folks to go get what they need, if they need, say, water or canned goods, diapers, that kind of thing. But now they really are in need of those core items like big generators that will keep them sustained for quite a while.
I wanted to ask you about that. You mentioned in the last segment that some of these folks have been told 8-12 months before power is restored. And obviously, Don, it's hard to leave your home and leave your possessions. But what is the practicality of staying in these areas that could be isolated for 12 months from right now?
Sure. Well, I mean, in most cases, these folks have farm animals. Their businesses are here. Multiple generations live on the same street or in the same community. I just don't think it's feasible to say they're going to be able to pack up and move. One gentleman I talked to said that they haven't heard anything from FEMA, but he got a text. Once Starlink was up and running, they all kind of giggled that they finally got a text from FEMA to sign up. And he did, and he said that he qualified for 2 nights in a hotel. Well, he's got farm animals. His parents live next door. You know, they're just not going anywhere. It's not realistic to think that they're going to pack up and move and leave their communities, because their communities are so intertwined, and that support system is really what's getting them through this now. So the idea of being able to move and leave it temporarily probably isn't feasible for most of them.
Donna King from the Carolina Journal joins us this morning on the News Hour. Keeping that thread on FEMA, you just said these people haven't heard anything from FEMA. We know that's been a hot criticism over the last couple of weeks.
Sure. Two of the four people in just one community, families that I talked to, said they have not. They said that they did. One said they did sign up to see what they qualified to get, and so far he said it was a couple nights in a hotel room. But more may be coming. You know, this is kind of going to be a long, drawn-out process, but right now none of them have any answers or what this is going to look like. They really don't, because it's not like Tampa or something like that where you have 12 square miles and it's all flat. We're talking about 25 counties that in many cases are only accessible by the air. So if you're going to get heavy lift equipment and, you know, real help in there, it's going to have to come in large-scale things like a Chinook or something like that until they can get the roads going. So getting electricity, getting roads repaired, getting water systems. You have areas that have lost their entire water system. That is a big, big deal. The community where we were had what they call gravity water, spring water, where they could at least flush toilets and that kind of thing. Other areas are going to be starting from scratch with a water system.
You mentioned that water system part. That was mentioned during the General Assembly press conference on Wednesday, and I guess it makes sense, Donna, but the House Speaker said that it could take 4+ years to get a new water system online, and I guess it makes sense when you think of the complexity. That's almost unimaginable to think.
It is, and in those areas, they're dealing with a much different timeline, and whether they're going to be able to sustain it in the near term is hard to say. There were folks there that we met that have, say, propane-based generators. Well, propane trucks can't get through these roads. So it's trying to decide what one thing they can do that will help make everything else even possible. The water system is one of those things, and if it takes 4 years, what do they do in the meantime? And that's the big question.
Donna King from the Carolina Journal continues with us this morning. You mentioned that you were with the National Guard. Was there any discussion with these folks? Were private residents in at these areas at some point before the National Guard stepped in, or were they completely cut off until then?
Yeah, they were there. They have had private groups come in. One of the things that the National Guard said was particularly helpful was Operation Airdrop, I believe is the name of it, and they were able to kind of coordinate. They were able to coordinate local pilots, local people who have experience in doing things like this. And that was one of the challenges they said is that, you know, everybody wants help. Everybody wants to be of service, but you have to make sure that you're not endangering yourself and others by getting out there. So they've been able to get help in through vehicles, but there are very few vehicles that fit on some of these really damaged roads. So they have had a lot of private air support, private, you know, perhaps former military helicopter pilots who now have their own helicopter, pilots of that nature. That has been really critical in this process. Now, in the beginning, these National Guard were doing search and rescue. They were bringing people in from these remote cutoff communities. Those missions have transitioned a little bit to more delivering that heavy-duty equipment. So the mission is changing, but it is still going every day.
Donna, I'm sure you're going to be documenting your experience. Where can folks find that?
Absolutely. We've got a ton of footage, some fantastic interviews with amazing people. The resilience of the human spirit, particularly in Western North Carolina, is just phenomenal. And the service that our National Guard is providing to our communities from areas, not just North Carolina, Connecticut, Maryland, Michigan, name it, all out here really lending a hand and helping save lives every day. We'll have a lot of this footage on CarolinaJournal.com and, of course, on our YouTube channel.
It's 5:29 on the Carolina Journal News Hour. News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT. Time for another look at the roads this morning with Boomer Von Cannon.
Hey, thank you, Nick.
WBT, and for you.
Hot.
It's 5:36. Welcome back to the Carolina Journal News Hour on News Talk 1110 and 99.3 WBT. We're also streaming live on our Carolina Journal YouTube channel this morning. U.S. Representative and Attorney General candidate Dan Bishop is suing his opponent's campaign for defamation. Earlier this month, Bishop and his campaign for North Carolina Attorney General filed a defamation suit against U.S. Representative Jeff Jackson's campaign, the state Democrat Party, the Democrat Attorney General's Association, and a company that conducted polls and surveys for claims about his legal career that he says are false. The lawsuit, which was filed October 3rd in Union County, states that Bishop has been defamed by claims that he represented clients who stole money from the elderly. The suit states that in July, the data analytics firm called Donata called a Union County voter to conduct a political survey and asked them if they would be more or less likely to vote for Dan Bishop if they knew, quote, as a lawyer, he represented people who stole money from the elderly, end quote. Bishop states in the lawsuit that the questioner presented the claim as, quote, a factual assertion and said that the question could have been asked of hundreds of other voters as part of the survey. Bishop states that in his nearly 30 years of private practice, he never represented people who stole from the elderly. The lawsuit claims that the question echoes reporting by the news outlet The New Republic earlier this year, which wrote an article in June that as a private attorney, Bishop worked multiple times with organizations accused of questionable business practices. In the lawsuit, Bishop claims that the story was riddled with falsehoods and was republished last month with substantial changes after his lawyers contacted the New Republic about potential defamatory content in the article. As a note at the bottom of the story states, quote, it originally misstated the status of one of the cases it mentioned and has, quote, been updated for clarity. But as we know, the retraction of a story like that often doesn't get the same play as the initial story itself. That was filed in a Union County courtroom earlier this month. We'll see how that rolls out here. Obviously not expecting any significant movement on that before Election Day. However, we'll keep an eye on it over at carolinajournal.com. It's now 5:38 on the Carolina Journal News Hour. As we continue to talk about devastation in western North Carolina left by Hurricane Helene, the medical industry has a vested interest. Teresa Opeka from the Carolina Journal joins us this morning. IV bags, Teresa, how does that connect to what's going on in western North Carolina?
Yes, good morning, Nick. Thanks for having me. So Baxter International, it's a global company with one of its largest manufacturing facilities in Marion, which is in McDowell County, was severely hit by Helene. They had a levee broke, so they were inundated with water and basically shut operations down. They have about 2,500 people who work there. So they supply about 60% of the IVs and dialysis products across the U.S. So that took a big hit. Actually, that industry was already facing a shortage beforehand, so this only worsened that.
Yeah, when you talk about when you manufacture 60% of a product and that goes away, we spent some time last week talking about the quartz mine that's not far from there that is the only supplier for this. All of this, Teresa, is an interesting exercise, unfortunately, at the reliances that we have in the supply chain.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. So now what they're trying to do at this point is look for ways to get back online, obviously, but they have, as I said, they were global. So they're trying to import from other locations, trying to get those locations to ramp up production. They're also they're going to the most vulnerable populations in the medical field, which is children's hospitals. They're trying to make sure that they get 100% of what they need. They're doing that. But yeah, supply chain, and you've seen we've had such issues with supply chain over the last few years, it seems.
Absolutely. So when we talk about this shortage, obviously it's affecting the medical industry, but this is also a very large employer in that community, correct?
Correct. Yeah, 2,500 employees. Obviously, they want to make sure they're all safe, they're all accounted for, and they're okay. But yeah, that's a huge hit for Western North Carolina as well as other industries in the area.
So how is the medical industry dealing with this right now? You mentioned that they're trying to prioritize certain things like children's hospitals. Is this having an effect on things like elective surgeries or things that people don't necessarily need done right now?
Yes, absolutely. So a lot of the hospitals across the country, including right here, UNC hospitals, which I did speak to somebody there when they're press people, let me know that they are keeping an eye on the situation, and they are also postponing elective surgeries that go and any like maybe outpatient, anything to do with that, and that's going across the country. Also, an interesting fact is in the research I did for the story, Mass General up in Massachusetts, they're resorting to using Gatorade, which has electrolytes. We all well know that. You work out or you've got some illness, they always advise you to take Gatorade. So they've actually resorted to using Gatorade in this situation. So yeah, it's a pretty important piece of the puzzle when it comes to supply chain for hospitals, for anybody.
There's been a lot of good recovery this week out west. Power's been turned on for tens of thousands of individuals. DOT and federal crews are in there opening roads back up. Is there any idea from the company as to a timeline when they might be able to get this facility back online?
Yeah, they said they're going to go in stages right now. I think there's about 4 stages, and they're hoping by the end of 2024, by the end of the year, to be fully, fully engaged again, fully mobile as far as getting everything out to people. They're hoping by the end of the year.
While that sounds like it's a long time, realistically, it's not. When I guess you look at some of that devastation and destruction, it's going to take a lot longer than just a couple of months to get other areas back in Western North Carolina back online, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I think that's the best case scenario, but, hopefully they will do that. In the meantime, they're also, we even had a representative, Congressman Greg Murphy, who asked the the Biden administration, Biden-Harris administration, to declare like an emergency for this. American Hospital Association is also asking for that. So like to ramp up things, to get things, more fully, let's get the ball rolling, because it's such an important component for a lot of people. You go to a hospital, you get saline, you get an IV drip. This is something important. So Biden-Harris administration hasn't responded yet, but maybe if there's enough pressure on them, they will, to maybe look at some other ways to get this going in the country.
You can read more on this story by visiting our website, carolinajournal.com. 543 News Talk 1110 99.3 WBT. Time for another look at your Friday morning commute with Boomer Von Cannon.
Hey, thank you, Nick.
It's 5:50 and welcome back to the Carolina Journal News Hour on News Talk 1110 and 99.3 WBT, also streaming live this morning on our Carolina Journal YouTube channel. Governor Roy Cooper yesterday signed the Disaster Recovery Act of 2024. For those keeping track at home, that's House Bill 149. The state legislature unanimously passed this law on Wednesday, which allocates $273 million from the savings reserve for disaster relief efforts in response to Hurricane Helene. Breaking down that $273 million, $250 of it is going to the federal disaster assistance programs, which is supposed to help manage cash flow within state agencies while they await Federal Emergency Management, or FEMA, reimbursement. And additionally, $16 million is going to the Department of Public Instruction, that's DPI, and $5 million to the North Carolina State Board of Elections for modified election operations in upwards of 25 counties, which, by the way, we heard yesterday and earlier this week that early voting will start in those counties, at least at some level and in some impact, starting next Thursday. That's October the 17th. With that, Governor Roy Cooper said this storm caused catastrophic damage, but showed the resiliency of North Carolina's people and communities. We must continue the bipartisan work to help them build back stronger. House Speaker Tim Moore commented on why it was important to pass this legislation and the resiliency out in western North Carolina. He said this earlier in the week.
So the particular bill that we are taking up today does an initial appropriation of $273 million. $250 million of that goes to state agencies and local government for federal disaster. Again, we have the federal match that would be applied to. $16 million for lost compensation for school nutrition programs. $50 million from existing water sewer reserves. $2 million to provide technical assistance to for FEMA grants for affected counties. $5 million to the State Board of Elections for voter outreach and communication in the affected areas. Small business loans through Golden Leaf, reimbursed via FEMA. Absentee ballots returned to any county in the state. And Senator Berger will talk in more detail about the elections piece, but hotline for displaced voters, things like waiving DMV fees, and like when someone's license is supposed to expire, they don't have time to mess with that right now. Granting extensions of those. School calendar flexibility, funds flexibility for various agencies, and then we've also waived some certain environmental requirements that we need to get waived, like burning restrictions, wastewater treatment restrictions, and road construction to get this process moving. We don't need the rebuilding. We don't need these efforts tied up in bureaucracy and delay. So trying to do that to streamline it. But
that's House Speaker Tim Moore earlier this week at a General Assembly press conference talking about how that $273 million is set to be allocated. Also important to note, as part of the adjournment resolution that the House voted on earlier in the House and the Senate voted on earlier in the week, they are allowed to, and in all likelihood will reconvene coming up on October the 24th. That is 2 weeks from yesterday, where they could potentially pass a second round of disaster relief funding if that is needed. We'll be keeping a very close eye on that over on our website at carolinajournal.com. A nationwide shortage of IV fluids and dialysis products has intensified following damage to the Baxter International North Cove manufacturing facility in Marion, North Carolina. The facility, which produces 60% of the U.S. supply of IV solutions, was forced to close after heavy rain caused a levee breach, flooding the site and damaging access bridges to the facility. The American Hospital Association has urged the Department of Health and Human Services to declare a public health emergency and for the FDA to expedite other solutions. Hospitals like UNC have already postponed non-emergency surgeries to conserve supplies, while Mass General in Massachusetts has resorted to alternate hydration methods such as Gatorade and plain water. Baxter has increased its allocation of IV solutions for priority customers and children's hospitals while expanding production at some of their other international sites. Full production at the North Cove facility in Marion is expected to gradually resume by the end of the year. The Department of Health and Human Services is collaborating with partners to mitigate the shortage while also preparing for potential disruptions from Hurricane Milton. I believe they've got some facilities there in Central Florida, so obviously dealing with that as well. It's a very interesting story, and as we talked with Teresa Opeka about in the previous segment, just goes to show you the reliance that we have on certain things that you wouldn't think about when you're talking about a hurricane or flooding in western North Carolina. The focus, of course, has been on, as it should be, the lives, the recovery, the disaster response. But with that, all of these companies, some of them employing thousands upon thousands of individuals that are out of work for the foreseeable future, and the massive impact it has not only in North Carolina but across the country when a company like this produces 60% of IV solutions. It's an interesting story. We'll continue to track it over at CarolinaJournal.com. Speaking of recovery, J.D. Vance, the Republican vice presidential candidate, was in Greensboro yesterday. He held a town hall last night at the Curie Convention Center. They've been doing these, the Trump campaign has been doing these across the country as they talk to voters and get asked questions. He was asked about that hurricane response.
You have the hurricane. Western North Carolina is underwater. What should have happened is that the president and the vice president should have sent the 82nd Airborne to Western North Carolina that day, and it should have happened right away. And instead, of course, we had a president at the beach and a vice president at a fundraiser in San Francisco. What you need in times like this is you just need leadership.
You just need leadership. That is J.D. Vance yesterday in Greensboro. That's going to do it for a Friday edition of the Carolina Journal News Hour. Hey, I'm filling in for Pete Callender today, 12 to 3 right here on WBT. Hopefully you can join us for that. If not, of course, we are back Monday morning at 5. WBT News is next, followed by Good Morning BT live from the Charlotte Motor Speedway. We're back Monday morning at 5. Have a great weekend.